people in the room to hear this discussion. I'm super excited for it. All right. So for anyone who's been living under a rock and doesn't know, Ram Castillo is one of my favorite humans. He's a design director, 2-time author, speaker, CreativeLive instructor, business decision-making coach, and approved advisor based in Sydney. He has worked with global agencies, including Ogilvy Mather, DDB, JWT, McCann, Saatchi and Saatchi. And his clients include some household names you might have heard of, like Audi, McDonald's, Qantas, Google, AMEX, CBA, Toyota, the Louis Vuitton Group. His podcast, The Giant Thinkers, has 250,000 active listeners, which is extraordinary. And really, he just helps business owners get unstuck and make better decisions. So part of that I'm learning is through this concept of human design and design thinking. And one of the things that I love to do on the show, by the way, for everyone listening, hi, I'm Sara McCord. I like demystifying the things that I think sometimes we think we're breaking down, but we don't realize that we can break down to an even further level for everyone listening. For someone who maybe it's their first time hearing this concept, or maybe they've heard it over and over again and they always kind of nod along, or maybe they think they get it, but we can always kind of explore more when we're talking to someone who's truly an expert in something. And so I want this to be a space where we can ask questions. And we really lived into that in part 1 of your show, because usually I ask questions, but we can take it to 60 minutes. And originally I was like, you know what, we'll talk about, human design. We'll talk about your career journey. We'll talk about mentorship. We'll talk about podcasting. And then we cut it down to human design. And then you were like, okay, there are 5 things. And we got through 3 of them. So I was hoping, while I share this out really quickly, if you could remind everyone what those first 3 elements are from part 1, which they should go back and watch the full breakdown. And then we'll start on 4 and 5.
Yeah, excellent. Well, again, happy to be here. Loving the fireside experience. Thanks to everyone for watching this, whether it's live or replay. But I spoke with Sara about design thinking, and one of the most universal design thinking methodologies or frameworks, you could say, is somewhat of a sequence and a framework, and it's 5 parts. And it's the empathy phase, purely to understand the person or group of people that we're just looking to explore dialogue with. From that conversation, you eventually uncover problems. And this is the define phase. So we empathize, then we define. And when we define, we're actually defining down to problem statements that we should score. We should score them based on importance, impact, and decide which one we would like to prioritize. And that leads us to the 3rd phase, which is ideate. And ideate, also known as conceptualize, we come up with ideas. It's very fun to come up with ideas. But here's the thing, you're probably thinking, wow, I've got a lot of ideas and I never really did the first 2. And that's part of part 1 that we discussed, the importance of empathy and defining before you come up with ideas, because that really is going to help you with the product market fit. That's going to help you with seeing if your efforts are even viable, feasible, desirable, and all those things, right? Sustainable. And then we're going to cover the second 2 parts here, which is to prototype and to test and iterate. But do you want me to give you a quick example, Sara, while you're still doing stuff there? Yeah. Sorry, you're just
I'm muted. I'm talking to you and I'm muted.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm really hopeful that people will go back and watch part 1 for the first 3 steps, because we really break it down. I think every time that Ram thought that he'd answered a question, I asked another one. So I would love to dive right into prototyping again, because, candidly, even in the language of this step, I feel like for some people that might be intimidating. They might think like, do I need a 3D printer? You know what I mean? Like, what does prototyping mean? And I think so, let's start there. What does prototyping mean?
let's keep it super simple. Prototyping, of course, might seem like, okay, 3D printer, physical thing, or screens of an app. No, not necessarily. Prototyping is turning your ideas into a physical representation or a tangible experience of a product or service that will solve a user's needs, slowly adding greater detail and complexity as you move, because it's not linear. You're moving between these phases. You move from prototyping to testing, and immediately you might get some new information where you have to go back to prototyping or go back to ideating. It's a fluid journey. Design thinking is powerful because of that. You're not set. You have to be open to moving and evolving. So, for example, a prototype could be paper prototype. You might have heard of this. Prototype might be digitized, but it could just be a mock-up, right? It could just
But
be.
I actually, unsurprisingly, I want to take it back a step and ask a question, right? It was shocking. I actually think sometimes that we give more grace to like established companies. So I'm making this up. But let's say that Nike had a revolutionary idea for a shoe. And Nike was like,
Yep.
we're going to test this revolutionary idea for a shoe. Well, we trust Nike. We trust their running shoes. So we're more likely to be like, oh, this is so cool. I'm testing this running shoe. But I think for new business owners, it's scary to prototype, which I'm going to also like synonymize with test because I think it's a similar, less scary word. Because there's a concern that will the market, if you're newer, think that your idea isn't fully formed yet? Will they think that you're chaotic? Will they think that you actually don't know what you're doing? I mean, it's one of those things where it's interesting. It's kind of like how we say vulnerability is strength. You're going to have a better product if you have the courage to say, I don't have all the answers. Let's test it out and make sure this works for you before we say this is the final thing. But like, what does that look like? Is it feedback groups? Is it in network? Is there a way to do it so that the outside world still thinks you have your stuff together? Or could you prototype? So like, here's a question I have for you. I know that you redid the part of the subway system in Australia. If you were going to prototype those things, did you just have like a pilot station and you just told everyone that? Or did you test it internally before you even took it out to the world? Like, I really want to break down what this testing looks like so that it actually up levels user confidence and doesn't make people think, why do you keep changing your mind?
Sketching.
Tell me more.
Yeah. And this is it. Like a mood board or sketching. So we did simple sketches of scenarios, Sarah, on platform, planning a trip, certain ticketing systems in the platform for food. If it was long train trips, offboarding, we drew, we storyboarded, right? Like that's a prototype. Let me make that clear. That is a prototype. A paper prototype can look like sketches. It can look like mood boards.
But I guess that my question is, when you're saying we tested these things with offboarding and tickets, so you sketched it out, but then was there actually like a ride that was the test? And did you tell everyone it was a test ride, or how did you manage their expectations if it went wrong?
Yeah, we didn't. And that's part of why we were able to move so quickly. What we did was we used techniques like, so first of all, group or individual, tick, both. Yes, we did that. You put these visual references to prompt as close as possible. Because Sarah, reality is no one's going to build a prototype at that scale, a station. Sure, you can build a demo, small version of it, but that's where you have to really ask what's the payoff and the trade-off for that. So what we did was imagine a place that looks like this, and we showed them the image on the screen, and it's a drawing. there is a little coffee cart here, and there's access to Wi-Fi while you're waiting. There's a covered area in case it rains, and this and that. And we've drawn out. We want them to imagine. There's a technique as well where we
So it's
need
like
to
focus
introduce
groups.
focus groups. Yeah, it's very similar, very similar. But what we're doing is we're not we're just talking to them about what do you think's missing here, or how do you feel about this? Why is that you're feeling? We start bucketing these what we call what's said into themes. And what we want to do is we want to group these. It's an affinity map exercise is great. For those that don't know affinity mapping, it's grouping like thoughts together or like themes. And if you start seeing patterns, listen well.
Yeah.
Don't ignore these patterns. The other thing is, I'll give you an example, Sarah. When we were naming something. For example, a lot of companies have difficulty naming a product or a new thing or a new range, let's call it. And some people want to get really creative, right? They want to get really creative. They want to theme their new range or their new collection. And here's a great exercise. We tried naming for a financial company that I advise. We started naming certain portfolio asset classes into bringing in nature themes, like I don't know, oak tree something, or emerald green blah. Okay, right. Very conceptual naming, but for a financial services product,
right,
it actually became very confusing. People were WTF.
Do I want to invest in the emerald green portfolio? I don't know. I want real estate.
Well, they don't know what it was. They didn't know what it was.
Right.
And sometimes right there, every single person, when we said, can you group these cards? So tool right now, get into card sorting. Get cards in front of people. You can digitize this. Get cards in front of people and write down certain themes or concepts and go, can you organize this into groups and see what they do? Or organize this from important to least of importance or appealing to least appealing. You will be amazed how even something as simple as card sorting can quickly cut through
the noise,
the complexity of too many, in many ways, bias or personal preference, let's call it.
Yeah. I want to, Ram, before we go to the next thing, I do want to welcome Rock and Lolita and Kim and James and Dr. Janie and tell you guys, I am saving time for questions in this show. So if you have them, definitely get on up here and ask Ram questions. We're so grateful you're joining us this morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. Okay, so Ram, my next question, and then we'll get to the next step, I promise, because I think that these are,
I'll insert one other thing, Sarah.
Yes.
I'll insert one other thing. Sorry, one really simple thing. For example, if you were to say to someone that I want the next product or I want our brand, let's say, to be adventurous, as an example, I want you to disconnect yourself from what you think adventurous looks like, feels like, sounds like, all those things. Because when we did this for another brand, there was adventure on one end as outdoors in the wilderness, in the bush, in the jungle. And then there was adventure in the ocean, in the deep ocean, in the abyss of the water. Two totally different adventures. And so, this is why we need to prototype, right? Even with mood boards.
So that's actually kind of related. to the question that I'd had, which was kind of around, in some ways, how do you frame this process with an open enough mind that you can get the valuable enough information that you need? So that's actually kind of related to that. So here's my question for you, as far as kind of our preliminary assumptions as a business owner and the information that we gather. So let's say, again, I have a product that I want people to think of. I've chosen the word adventurous. And let's exhaust this example. But let's say that it's something about, like, it's a product for women, and by adventurous, I mean, like, I want to help stay-at-home moms try new things that they've never thought of before. But I'm thinking of training, and they're thinking of hiking on a mountain. To your point, that's what we learn. So my question is then, like, does that mean, because I almost feel like at that point there are two things that a business owner could do, right? One would be to say, oh, well then, like, let's pick a different word. Let's pick something that makes women automatically think, oh, training outside the home. But another would be to say, like, no, actually, I really want to dig into adventurous, and I want to build this whole campaign around the fact that you don't have to climb a mountain. You can just learn how to set up a store. What's that kind of look like when you take that information in a way that'll actually serve your business and your customer?
So if I was doing that prototype, I would bring in reference points again. So let's say I sketched scenarios, I brought in mood boards, I brought in keywords in those spaces that might trigger different meaning and will point us into scoring what they feel is the shared vocabulary of adventure. Okay. I would then test this. So let's say it lives as a food product. Okay. Let's just call it a energy bar. Let's just say that it comes down to, wow, we found out that that adventure for them means hiking. And we found a pain point that they started to feel low in energy. They needed a hit of, or a boost of something. And what they were currently doing was not sustaining their long, adventurous hikes. Okay. So now you're met with, okay, what is a solution to that scenario that they experience a lull in energy levels? Let's just say, wow, we didn't think it would go this way. We were thinking product, maybe compression pants. But really, sorry for my language, they don't fucking want compression pants. They don't want compression pants.
You don't have to apologize. Keep going.
Right? But let's just say, and this is the heart of that.
See, this is the point.
And
of
then we find.
But if you're launching an energy bar and they don't want compression pants, I think you're like, great. Maybe I just need to figure out whether my energy bar is for the mountain or for the woman who works through lunch, or those are, two different customers, like we talked about in part one. But yes, if you designed a compression pant, what do you do if you go to the market and they're like, we don't want it, we want energy bars?
Well, this is what happened to Shopify, for example. This is exactly what happened to Shopify. If I may, can I share that story real quick?
Yeah, of course.
So, for example, beautiful case study for this example. So, Shopify was founded around 2006 officially by a gentleman named Tobias Luke. And long and the short of it is they attempted to launch a snowboarding company to sell snowboarding equipment.
Right.
So they thought massive market for them, but they couldn't find a sufficient enough e-commerce website platform. They were using by default Yahoo stores back then, and it didn't fit what they thought was the best user experience for their customers. Tobias, one of the co-founders, he was actually a web developer. So he ended up building his own platform. And guess what? People were banging at the door at Tobias going, how did you, what website platform are you using? There were more inquiries about his website platform that they ended up needing to ditch the snowboarding business. And so
Oh
here
my
is,
God, Ram, this is like the moment of the show where I'm like, it's all valuable, but this is why we have people in the room right now. Because I think that we tell these stories as like marketing. God, I always forget the word for a story that has a lesson because it's not a proverb and it's not an allegory and it's not a prophecy. I always forget what that actual word is. It's not an adage, but
epiphany.
a what?
An epiphany?
No, I'm going to find the word out for this, but there's like a story that you tell people that teaches them a lesson. I forget, but there's a word for it and I always forget what it is. But type it in the chat if you know the word that I forget every show. But here's what's interesting. We tell these stories like how YouTube started as a dating site, right? And now it's like the number one video search platform, and it's the number two search engine after Google. It's where you go for it's YouTube. No one thinks of YouTube as a dating site. You know what I mean? Like we tell story of company after company after company where the founder had one idea, realized the market was using the product for something else, and leaned into that, and now there's like, and again, it's so interesting, and it's super interesting actually in 2022 because, and I know that again we're kind of moving a little bit potentially outside of this process here. I don't know if this is all fluid when you go back and iterate, but like what's really interesting is that we've seen case studies of companies seeing their customers either identifying a problem or a different market fit on social media. And it goes viral when customers are using a product in a way that the founders never thought of. And I feel like what I'm taking from this interview that like all business owners could lean into to be more successful is that like anything else in life, when you see this, right, you have two options, right? One is to be like, no, it's a snowboarding site. No, it's a dating site. No, this is my vision. I'm going to stick to it dogmatically and I'm going to make that succeed. Or you can say, and this is, I think, the point of everything that we're talking about, oh, my customer wants to use this for something entirely different. Let's walk down that road. And those people with that open-mindedness are the super successful ones.
Yeah, it's exactly what we spoke about with the idea of, hold on, okay, let's say I was going in to help female hikers on their hiking adventures, only to find that whatever it was, so let's just say for the sake of this, it's wow, I thought they needed an energy bar when really they wanted compression pants, for example. It's the exact same thing. You would need to still enter the market. You still need to enter it. But I find that too many spend way more than what's required. It's not really a prototype. You've actually built the thing and you're left with a full-blown attempt at a solution when if you look at the first iteration, there's screen grabs of the first Shopify iteration, it was rubbish. It was like the Snow Devil, it's called. The first Snow Devil website was the Shopify website that they built. And it was almost Craigslisty type looking thing.
Yeah.
But the point is, it reminds me of, when we are able to detach ourselves from the way it's always been done, only then will you find something new. And we have to go back to the question as a tool, how might we finish that sentence? You and I, business owners, aspiring entrepreneurs, maybe you're not a business owner yet, you have to lean into how might we. It's like when Airbnb case studied, their reverse engineering of the experience. Most companies stop at, what does a 5-star business look like? Don't stop there. What does a 6-star look like? So they then said, oh, well, maybe a group of choir boys, sing angelically when they welcome you at the airport. Okay, well, what does a 7-star look like? Well, Bono is playing at the airport for you. Well, what does an 8-star? What does a 9-star? What does a 10? You'd go to the edge and then you pull back. But I think even when you feel that your idea it has merit, it has funding, it has some user base. I think about Spotify, for example. Okay,
Yep.
I don't think people know this about Spotify, but when they first released their small version in Europe, it built a bit of traction. Sure, they expanded into the market. This was back in 2006 as well, and they launched officially in 2008. And what happened was, it was a rocky start. They lost 4.4 million in the first year, and then that was in 2009. In 2010, the antiviral software Symantec identified Spotify as a Trojan horse, a virus, so it was being blocked. Then, despite all of these stumbles, they still grew. They quickly grew, because what they were really good at, and if you look at Spotify's story, not Shopify, Spotify, they still did the one thing well, which was in many ways, what we're buying is easy access, music on the go, just like with everything, right? Where we don't need to carry all our music in physical ways. They were true to that. They made it accessible. They reduced one friction point, which is subscription model. Not one album I'm going to buy, one song I'm going to buy. No, have it all. And sometimes it's just that one tweak. It's that one little tweak that you might even start your prototype there. Bring in what's available on the market, pull apart features, pull apart how that product's made, introduce something new. Now we're talking about blue ocean strategy, of course, removing something, increasing something.
Well, I do have one more question, and then I want to make sure we get through step 5, and then we can take this any direction we want. My next question is, again, because I always want to bring it back to like the potentially small business owner who's listening. You're like, so Shopify lost 4.4 million, but then they, but here's my question, right? And we keep going back and forth about whether you made the energy bars and they want the compression pants, or you made the compression pants, they want the energy bars. So you can pick it either way for this analogy, but you have a warehouse of one and you find out they want the other. Does that mean that you prototype too late? Should you prototype before you have the warehouse? And that's like, is that where people go wrong? That they like make 1 million compression shorts and then they find out they want energy bars because they got human design backwards, and like if they tested and sketched sufficiently first, they know what to have in the warehouse? Or like, so it's like, because we've kind of talked about pivoting a few different things. We've talked about, are you pivoting almost like your brand messaging to match your feedback? Or if you find out that people want a completely different product, like, I guess I want to help someone who's listening, I guess, kind of to know two things, like one, or really multiple things. We've kind of addressed like what happens if you realize that your customer is using your product for something different than you ever imagined. And it seems like the case studies say, like, let them lead, right? Then we have what happens when they view it differently. And I think that that's kind of like, well, again, like lean into like what resonates with them, let them lead. But then we have, they want something different. They don't want compression shorts. They want energy bars. They don't want energy bars. They want compression shorts. And I'm wondering, like, if we're just going to keep it very real, is it almost like you need to be a business of a certain size to say like, well, I'm in the health space for women, and so I'm going to have my investors fund something else? Or is it like, I mean, what do you do so that you don't end up with a warehouse full of one and a customer base that wants another?
Well, there's a few things that come to mind with this. I think that if you have a warehouse full of items, you've not done step 1 and 2 in a substantial level, because you shouldn't be buying that. You should never, ever be buying that much inventory. Second, you've got to look at how else that might be used, is the point. Big or small. It's exactly what Shopify were doing with the e-commerce store. But I'll give you another example that's even more relatable. Scrub Daddy, I think it's called.
Yep.
One of the most famous Shark Tank,
yep.
right?
I've had one.
Right? So Scrub Daddy, if you're listening to this, look it up. The story is this very thing. He, the founder, I forgot his name, he was originally a car detailer and would scrub and polish cars and buff them up and make them look great. And he owned a company back then that was doing well. And long and the short of it, 3M, the global company, was looking to acquire some of these companies, and he was one of them. But he had an inventory of all these scrubbers for cars. Nothing to do with dishwashing. Nothing. And so this is it. It's not enough to go, oh, well, I guess that's going to be a poor use of material or a poor use of whatever. You got to find where else this might fit. And this is the perfect time to do it. I'll give you one other example.
I love it. You're like a human catalog of branding examples. It's amazing. I love it.
Thank you. I think it's important to give examples. Otherwise,
it is because that way we're not living up here. We're like in the real world. I love it.
So Google Scrub Daddy or whatever it's called, and how he started. Long and the short of that is he ended up tweaking that for washing. Of course, I'm think it's temperature controlled, right? If it's warm, it softens. If it's cold, it gets hard. Is that right, Sarah? Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Okay, I'll give you another example.
Work with them, Ram? No, I'm just kidding.
I don't. We don't even have them here
to sponsor this episode. It's coming. It's coming. Okay.
I love it. There is another company that I will want you to be aware of. It's called The Empowerment Plan by a wonderful entrepreneur woman from Detroit named Veronica Scott. And she wanted to break the cycle of homelessness in Detroit, specifically homeless women. And she had material and she had a problem. Homeless people, and how could I help clothe them, keep them warm? And what she did was she brought them in to make the very product that will keep them warm and others warm. So it's not obviously exclusive to just homeless people, but the actual product, because of her observation and because of her dialogue with homeless women and homeless families, was they needed to keep warm. So it's not just a coat, but it's a coat that turns into a sleeping bag, and a sleeping bag that turns into a coat. It's one product. And so what she did was she hired now previously homeless women to make the very thing that gets them employed.
Wow.
She trains them to use a sewing machine, and then they sell these out, and it funds the cycle of less homelessness in Detroit.
Wow.
But again, it came from a prototype where she was just like, how do I, scratching her head, how do I make not just a jacket, but maybe how do I maybe turn this into something more? So how? Well, she merged, there you go, sleeping bag, jacket, tested it, and it was very well received, right? And from episode 1, when we did this for the first half of Design Thinking, remember we were talking about the importance of creativity and innovation, and I defined creativity as 3 words: making unconventional connections. So this is where now you have to think about you not being traditionally in that industry as a good thing, because you're bringing something totally new to an industry that has never seen it the way that you see it. And we talked about underrepresented voices, and we talked about designing for the future.
Yeah.
But this is the way.
No,
Prototype
I agree with
testing.
all of that. It's so funny. I was telling a friend yesterday that I'd written an article for the Muse like 10 years ago because everyone was it was a new idea for people early on in their career that they could have transferable skills, that they could move from one industry to the other, and that, you know, the skills that you learn in fundraising would transfer to sales, or the skills that you learned, you know, in writing in this vertical would actually translate to writing in that vertical. But one of the articles that I'd written is I'd actually had coined a term where I wrote an article about additive skills, to your point, which is that it's not just the skills that transfer, but it's the fact that, like, you know, you have experience in web design and no one else applying for the role has experience in web design because it wasn't even called for and it's not something that they do there. And so you're saying, like, how can you do that with products in some way? Don't even just think of that as yourself, but think of that for your product, think of that for your company. What is your, and this is the other thing too, when people say sometimes they feel frustrated that they don't have the, so like for me, like I don't have a communications degree. You know what I mean? Like, and then sometimes I feel that way, like working in this field, that I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone read the same book in the second year of their communications degree. And I didn't have like the same course that everyone had or whatever. But like, to your point, by the way, I have a degree. It's just not in communications. But even that, what if I didn't? And people would be like, there are people who are like, oh my gosh, you know, I didn't graduate. I spent school working. But to your point, like, how do you take whatever that experience is and say, this is actually going to be what makes my product that much more informed, fascinating, different, innovative, creative?
Well, this is why we go to step 5, which is test. You have to test it. And I often say that if you can't first sell on the street to your family and friends, your neighbors, then it's not going to sell. If you can't sell with a warm lead, then of course you can't sell to a cold lead. So just first test to the people in your proximity. This is exactly what Airbnb did. And I know I bring these massive behemoth companies up.
No, I love it. They're the goal.
They all started locally. Like that's just the reality. They went to New York, Airbnb based in SF. Brian Chesky, Joe Gebbia, co-founders, they flew to New York because they thought, well, that's really where we should start properly outside of SF. And they only asked 20 people who had apartments and offered to photograph their apartments for free. And they said, we want to professionally photograph your apartment so that we have some inventory in our database for Airbnb, for what will be Airbnb. They started locally as well. But rewinding a little bit, okay, so we're in this dance between prototype and testing.
That's what I was going to say. This is actually the gift for everyone who listens to this point of the show, is that I didn't realize that I was conflating those. Because I was like, let's just call it prototype test because it's kind of like this. No. So the prototype is the sketching it out. Then you move the test stage. Now, I think what in my brain, I was already thinking of it in the circle, like prototype test, change your prototype. And that's why I was conflating the two. But I'm really grateful that you're actually like dissecting them out.
It is different because prototyping is the act of creating the minimum representation of it. Now, I'm talking representation, okay, in any form. Maybe that's a better word of explaining it. We got there in the end, okay? A representation.
No, that totally makes sense to me. That totally makes sense to me.
Okay, so here's an example, okay? Let's tie in as well a bit of internal sort of battle. What makes me credible? What makes me, insert what I don't have here. Okay, there's a wonderful entrepreneur in Australia. She's got, I think, 6 businesses now, all multi-million-dollar businesses. She's a young gun, Forbes 30 under 30, the whole thing. Her name is Greta Van Riel. Look her up. She's an amazing entrepreneur. But she started, her first company was Skinny Me Tea. Skinny Me Tea. She's not a tea expert, connoisseur, whatever you want to call it. She's not a chemical biologist. She's not a food scientist. No. What she found was that she herself found benefits from drinking certain concoctions of tea that were not available. She had to mix her own concoction up. And she found that it helped her with her health benefits, specifically her appetite, which led to helping her lose weight. Okay. Seems like maybe not too abstract, but it might be far-fetched, might be a marketing thing, whatever you want to call it. But what she did, again, as a prototype, was she bought a small batch of tea. She bagged them up into blank, no label bags that you just shove tea or coffee beans in, that type of thing. She bought stickers and she was individually sticking the labels, and she's got photos and she documents this on video, the story. But that's how Skinny Me Tea started. Okay. She sold it online. Again, not massive knowledge, but she tested it on a very small scale. Now she could pull the pin at any point and stop, but it took off. And so then she just continued the line of other flavors. And then she thought, because of that, it led her to her next business, which was a bottle of water that you can, that's separated so that you can put citrus fruits, leaves, anything you want to scent or
totally. Infusion.
Flavoring, infusion, that type of bottle, because one thing led to another. Long story short, she's got multiple businesses now sort of in that space, but she's not any different to you and I. She just found an observation. She took it to the smallest scale. She released it within her proximity. She didn't go buy massive inventory. And then you slowly go and you dance between going back to empathize, understand your customer, define the problem. Does it reaffirm that problem even existed? Has there been new problems that have arisen that will inform your version 2? Then you go back into ideation, and you can slowly tweak. Don't freak out. It's good. It's good to get it out there and to go, that is 60% shit, but 40% of it is good. What is that 40%?
Okay, there's so much that I love in you sharing that last example, Ram, because I do feel that it's so, it's just an example that does, I feel like, feels so relatable for everyone listening, re-listening, for me. And so again, like, to break this down, what I find really powerful about that example when we're talking about in this episode, kind of the prototype and test, is that, first of all, again, and I don't know what it looked like when she had these original bags, like you're saying, and the original labels and everything. Now, obviously, now that she's a multi-million-dollar business, she's not sticking the stickers on herself in her kitchen, right? Obviously, that's going to be professionalized. It's going to look better. But like you're saying, she had to start with that prototype. And then the really powerful thing about her testing it, and there are two things about this example that are really interesting. One is that we can have a hypothetical world where she learned something, right? Maybe it turns out that, and it's kind of like what we were talking about last time, maybe her customer turned out not to be someone who wanted to lose weight, but maybe the teas were so good that it ended up being that, again, getting to what we were talking about earlier, having that listening to your customer, that social listening, that if all of her customers were like, this tea tastes amazing with chocolate cake, I always have it after dinner. Well, that's not your diet crowd. That's your foodie crowd. But when you're saying, when you have a prototype, when you test it, you know that you can go back to that messaging. The other thing that I think is really interesting that what you shared is the fact that her next product was the water bottles. So we're almost complementing hot with cold. But to your point, she didn't throw away the teas. She didn't say, you know what? People want fruit in their water. I'm going to stop making tea and only make fruit water. She was like, I have tea. I'm going to start a separate business that's going to be water bottles. And again, you start creating that ecosystem. It actually reminds me a little bit. I just got back from Grant Cardone's 10X. And when you want to talk about an ecosystem, they literally had a slide with every 10x business, product, service, that each one promised to 10x that area of your life. So you have, Cardone Capital if you want to invest in the real estate. You have 10x stages if you want to be a public speaker. You have 10x health if you subscribe to what they think about their biohacking. You have 10x kids if you want to change how your children are educated. You have 10x incubator if you have a business. You 10x ladies if you're a woman who wants to do your own thing, like the woman empowerment. And it was like, to your point, it's so interesting. This is probably for our next discussion, but like, it's, to me, a little bit of that. You have your prototype, you test, you're a founder, you see the whole board. One question I have for you to bring it back to this is, how do you take your initial learnings to take your foundational product in the right direction? Or like we were talking about earlier, maybe assess if that's the right product versus say, and this is the thing that I'm going to build next time. Do you know what I mean? How do you do that of saying, I'm gathering all of this information that actually my customer doesn't just want tea, they also want fruit water. How do you know whether you pivot to fruit water or whether you just focus on tea and you do fruit water? Like, how do you filter all of that information?
So I think that there is a few factors that's going to help with the decision making around that. The first is what you identified is firstly, is this a complement to my current customer segment, or is this a totally different customer segment altogether? Mm-hmm. That needs to be defined. The second thing is, always think about what you can push downhill. Too many of us are thinking what we can push uphill. Keep focusing on what you can push downhill. What do I mean by that? Well, a Tesla car cannot exist without the battery. So there's two separate businesses there. And in fact, I don't know if people know this, but the bigger play that Elon Musk had always had from the beginning is, it's not the automotive side, it's the battery business. It's like these damn plugs and new plugs, and look, I've got one plugged here. They're creating the ecosystem that connects one product to another for the same customer. So step one, am I able to leverage the data I have from all the work that I've gathered from empathize phase and ask myself, what else do they need in the ecosystem of this pocket? Now, you just said you had an awesome example there. You go, Ram, what if, let's hypothetical, that the skinny me tea, the reducing appetite ended up being something else. So let's say that something else was, Ram, it actually made them go to sleep. So then you would need to go, well, do I keep the skinny me tea range? And how much effort and resources are going to utilize for me to launch a sleepy me tea range? Mm-hmm. Okay. Because it's like, so I work with a lot of, I don't know why, cakes, bakery businesses, a lot of bakery chains.
I'm coming to visit you and all of your cake bakery clients.
Right. I don't know why. And
then we'll go play tennis. So it'll all even out. It'll be good.
That's it. But see, if you look at the raw ingredient, for example, right, sugar, eggs, flour, whatever it is, I'm not an expert by any means, but it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, how are you utilizing that same raw ingredient?
Oh my God, right? I use that example all the time. That makes me so happy. I always will sometimes say to clients, you have the ingredients, how do we bake the cake? And to your exact point, you don't put a tiramisu in the oven and you don't put a unbaked cake in the fridge. Maybe you do put a tiramisu in the oven. I don't eat tiramisu. But do you know what I'm saying? You wouldn't put an ice cream cake in the oven. Let's go with that. Even though they're both cakes that you'd have for someone's birthday. Oh my gosh, I had a question for you. There was something that you said that I was like, oh my gosh, I have to ask Ram this question. I know what it was. Okay. One more question for you on this whole thing. Going back to when you were saying it's okay if your product is only 40% of what it needs to be and how much valuable information there is. Another question I had for you, when you were talking about iterating slowly, actually, when you started showing all of the different Apple products, one of the things that came to mind for me was the no RIP, the iPod and the iPod Shuffle, right? And those were big. Like, I remember both my iPod and my iPod Shuffle, and going back to the Spotify example too, like they were a huge it was really exciting, right? That you could just carry your music around. And then again, the iPod Shuffle, like you could carry all of your music around randomly. It was so light. It was so small. It was the thing that every athlete needed until we got an iPhone that had all of our music on it. And then why would you ever have an iPhone and an iPod? But I'm kind of curious to that point, like, and this is something that I think is really worth, digging into for a minute, is that like, the thing is that I know for me, one of the reasons why it made sense to buy an iPhone, even though I love my BlackBerry, was because I already had an iPod and an iPod Shuffle. I already had all of that brand affinity. Not to mention, to your point, every Mac product makes the next one feel intuitive. But like, if they had launched, hypothetically, an iPod or an iPod Shuffle and been like, oh, you know what? People want this on their phone. Let's just like wait until we figure that out. They wouldn't have had those successful products that they later sunsetted.
Absolutely right. I mean, now what you've uncovered there is readiness of the market, because you and I both know, everyone listening, that VR has taken a long time to get adoption. For one, the damn headsets were costing $2,000 to $3,000 per household.
Yep.
Only 5 years ago. Like, I tried to get one and I'm like, no one's gonna buy into that. I was looking at what to invest in the VR world. It just didn't take off.
But then I was in a clubhouse room with someone in COVID who said that because he couldn't see his family, he sent Oculus to all of his extended family so that they could all feel like they were sitting at the same beach house with their grandmother safely in COVID.
Well, here's the thing. The readiness sped up. To the demand and the behavior of what we needed, right?
Totally.
Like, I'll give you an example, like right now, right? Like, no longer, you brought up Nike at the beginning. By the way, I'm happy to stay for Q&A if there's anyone that wants to do Q&A after. But
You're the best, Graham.
Sarah, one thing you brought up was Nike, one of my favorite brands, right? Nike tick, yep, love it. But
it's
you know
probably
what?
like a mental, like I saw the check and I was like, let's talk about Nike.
Right. Now, if you look, and I encourage you to look at what they're doing, it's important to know what are the best brands in the world who are global players. How are they staying relevant? How? Okay. What they've done and have been pioneering is carbon neutral in like a few years, not 2050, like sooner, much sooner. And they're moving towards all shoes being made from entirely recycled material. We're almost there with Nike, almost. That's incredible, right? Now, again, it goes back to readiness of the market. There will seriously be no more people eventually, the majority, right? We're no more early adopters who are like pro climate change, sustainability, helping the environment. No, now we're past that.
Mm-hmm.
Now you are making decisions now, very conscious of how it impacts the environment. We are now at that readiness. So if you don't it's no longer a brand play. If your proposition from your brand values to the actual product goes down and meets the level of the minimum appetite for what the majority demand, which is the new baseline, that has to play into your prototyping and testing. Because if you can't compete in the bare minimum of what it takes to play, then you can't play. That's why the Skinny Me tea was great. She bought existing tea flavors and made combinations that didn't exist. right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of one other example, I'll give one other example that I love that I have to say.
I love when you give us examples.
I love this because it ties in everything we're speaking about. And thanks, Sarah, for that. I have to share this example. It is from I know they're doing this in the States because I've seen the competitor, but in Australia, one of my friends, he has a company that was a soap company. Okay. It was a soap company that spent so much money shipping because they were heavy, the liquid to the actual soap blocks.
Oh, I know where you're going. Okay, continue.
Right. And of course, it became a problem because obviously COVID distribution, but more importantly, the plastic and the packaging was a problem. So what did we find when we went back into, and I was helping him go back to empathizing, go back to who do we need to understand? People are no longer wanting to buy this heavy block of soap shipped to them, wrapped in plastic. No. So how do we get the soap to them? Well, we speak to them. We uncovered and defined problems. We started ideating. We found that they didn't like that. So what did we ideate? Reduce plastic, reduce weight. What did we find? A small, diluted soap cube, knowing that soap is over 90% water. And so they would put this soap cube and mix it themselves.
Yep.
In water. That was the solution. It's almost too simple. But this is, and I get tingles saying that example because this is like the readiness, readiness. If you did that 10 years ago, no, people want the lovely packaging. There wasn't an urgency for environmental consciousness. There wasn't an urgency. Now there is. So now the problem and solution must meet each other. Right?
Well, I totally agree with that. And I also think, to your point around market readiness and everything, it's, and to your point, people's goals shifted. And I don't even think that it's around, and you're exactly right that it is around everything having to do with, climate change and everything like that and being ecological. But also, I mean, I think about, as a woman in my mid to late 30s, okay, Bath and Body Works when I was growing up. Okay. I think about soap as like a hostess gift. Like, honestly, the whole role, I feel like in a lot of ways of soap in our society has like changed. Like, I remember going to like, family friends' houses and like in the powder room, like whoever was the host would have like beautiful bottles of soap. And it would be like a whole, like it was part of like the decor. Like, I literally feel like the role of soap is like evolved in our society. Then you have COVID and it becomes the most like utilitarian thing in the history. Like, I want to get my hands on soap. I want to make sure it makes my hands clean. I'm going to like finally, like we like realized that there was an epidemic of people who didn't wash their hands who now do. So we need a lot more soap.
100%.
So it's super interesting. And it's also interesting because I think that sometimes when people say like, look around, to your point, and find the solution, that doesn't have to be icky and that doesn't have to be taking advantage of things. Like, sometimes people look at businesses that exploded in COVID and they're like, oh, is that like ethically problematic that you'd explode during COVID? And the answer is no. If you help this many more people get soap during a health pandemic, like, it's extraordinary. If you marked your prices up, that would be unethical. You know what I mean? But if you actually like just came up with a solution, I think that's incredible.
Let's go. Yeah, 100%. And let's go back to like not wasting what you have.
Yeah.
That's sitting, whether it's inventory, whether it's knowledge, whether it's whatever asset that you can leverage. We saw restaurants turn into supermarkets and using co-working spaces. The staff that were previously waiters turned into delivery drivers or cyclists. Like 100%. This is that very thing.
And you also saw like a lot of tech founders try and be the ones who would come up with whatever the solution it would be, whether it was a better solution than a QR code for a menu because of security concerns, whether it was custom apps for the restaurants, whether it would get around the Grubhub behemoths. I totally agree with you. That's such a cool example because we needed it. Oh my gosh, Ram, I could talk to you all day. I definitely want to do two things, and then we will open it up if there's one question because you're generous enough to stay. One, I would love to just rehash what the 5 steps are with just kind of like a one-liner for each one in case people missed part 1. And then 2, I want to tell them where they can find you when you're not hanging out with me on Fireside.
Yeah, awesome. So real quick, design thinking involves a method that's partly a sequence, partly a framework. It's not linear, but the 5 steps, in many ways, they are steps, but you jump in between them throughout. We need to first understand. So the first thing is empathize, and just don't go in the conversation with the person with any preconceived notions or trying to find validation on a problem solution pairing. No, don't even attempt that. Get to know them, understand them, ask them questions, ask them about their day, about their week, about their life, and things will bubble up. That leads to problems that arise. Second is define. So you just define them, turn what's said into problem statements, and then score them from least important or urgent to most important and urgent, based on your own resources. Okay, what you think you can solve really, really well. The third thing is ideate. So pick one problem from step 2 and come up with solutions. Have fun with it. And by the way, inserting real life experience here. Now, I graduated design college back in 2004, right? Over 16 years ago now. And the first week of design school, my design teacher for that class said, here's the brief, sell recycled water, come up with 100 ideas. The next day, we hadn't slept, came up with 100 ideas. They could have been drawn or headlines, so copy or sketches. And then he said to every single one of us, he said, you all came up with 100 ideas? We're like, yep. He goes, now here's the bin, throw all of them in the bin. He said, they're the first 100 ideas that everyone else has already thought of. And so day one, punch in the guts in design school. Yeah. Ideas are infinite. Why? Because there are variables that are constantly changing. So time, obviously, Einstein said this, nothing changes if nothing moves. And he talks about the principle of relativity, that nothing is ever certain or absolute. And because of that, ideas are infinite. Ideas can be a mishmash, and we're constantly seeing, call it a remix, sure, but it's still a new idea. Okay, so ideate, come up with new ideas. We just spoke of a whole ton in this session. And then the fourth thing that we covered was a prototype, okay, a representation of the idea. And then get that in front of the person that we were empathizing with at the beginning, and then we test it in front of them. Now, that might be another conversation, that might be a run through, that might be an observation. Whatever it is, just test it on a small scale and see what they say. And then go back to the beginning or jump back to step number 3 and ideate some more.
Wow. I'm so grateful that you recapped that, because I hope that people listening were taking notes. I think these are things that can really help anyone at any stage of their business, at any stage of their product, when they're looking to break through, which is what you help people with. So that's so amazing, which reminds me, tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, so The Giant Thinker, everywhere on social, heavily active on Instagram. Send me a DM there. I'd love to meet you, say hello. But ramcastillo.com, my name up here. You can book a discovery call with me, or if you just want to chat about your business, that's open too. But yeah, just meet each other, get to know each other. I've got a podcast called Giant Thinkers, and I interviewed Patrick Moradoglu, Serena Williams' coach, just a week and a half ago, and I've interviewed a whole bunch of people, and this is what it's about. It's picking each other's brains, and I value Sarah so much. You've taught me a lot, and this is it. It's about being curious as well. And I'm only speaking about something that I do know, but when it comes to so many other things, I definitely am keeping my ear to the ground. But just connect with each other and keep learning, keep being curious. That's the goal.
Amazing. Well, Ram, I am such a huge fan of yours. You know that. I'm so grateful for you spending this time with us because, again, for me, one of the real beautiful things about social audio is the fact that we get access to people who have this understanding, who have this knowledge, who have this experience to ask the questions. And so I'm so grateful you spent this time with us today, and that everyone who missed it can watch the replay. And I hope you have a great evening.